What is more terrifying for a soldier, to lose life or to lose honor? In ancient Rome, the answer was obvious. Death could overtake anyone on the battlefield, but the loss of the legion's banner, the Golden Eagle, was considered a disgrace worse than death itself. Tacitus wrote that the loss of the eagle was considered not only a military catastrophe, but also an insult to the gods. For legionaries, this was akin to how in our time an entire country would lose its flag right before the enemy's eyes. At the center of each legion shone a standard with an eagle, Aquila. This was not merely a symbol, but the very soul of the unit. The eagle, made of pure silver or gold, reminded of ancestral victories and served as a pledge of loyalty to the emperor. Every warrior swore to defend it to the last drop of blood. The word aquilifer designated the man who carried the eagle. Usually this was one of the strongest and bravest soldiers, surrounded by special respect. His death or flight with the eagle was considered an indelible stain. Imagine a formation of 5,000 heavy infantry, each with armor weighing 25 kilograms, rising to attack under the sun that melts the earth beneath their feet. In this avalanche of shields and spears, the eagle was like a flame in the darkness, the point behind which the entire legion marched. The loss of this fire meant chaos. Warriors without the eagle lost faith, like athletes who took the field and saw that their captain had disappeared. Polybius wrote that warriors could flee, lose horses, shields or weapons, but as long as the eagle stood in the center, the army lived. But if the Aquila ended up in enemy hands, even victory turned into defeat. This was like breath torn from the chest of an entire legion. And then the hunt began, not only for the enemy, but for their own shame. But how did Rome reach the point where the sacred eagle could end up in enemy hands at all?
To understand, we need to return to the years when Rome might first encountered a challenge capable of questioning its invincibility. At the very end of the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was already breathing with the anticipation of empire. The enormous military machine that had extended its claws from Spain to Syria required not only strength, but also discipline. Legionaries marched for weeks, covering 25 kilometers a day, carrying armor, weapons, personal belongings, and part of the common equipment. The total weight could exceed 35 kilograms. Romans called such infantry Marius's mules, hinting that a warrior resembled a pack animal rather than a man. It was precisely this habit of heavy marches that gave them the ability to suddenly appear where the enemy did not expect a strike. In the army's composition, everything was strictly distributed. 10 cohorts made up a legion. Each cohort had several centuries. A centurion commanded approximately 80 soldiers and was considered not only an officer, but also an example of personal bravery. His staff, the vindicta, served as a symbol of authority, but was more often used to maintain order in formation. Above the centurions stood tribunes, and the highest commander of the legion was the legate, appointed by the Senate or emperor. He was precisely the one responsible for ensuring that the eagle never ended up in enemy hands. The image of the eagle in the camp was like a heart in a warrior's chest. Every evening before sleep, it was carried away to a special shrine, Sacellum. It was located in the center of the camp, next to the altar where sacrifices were made. In the silence of night, soldiers saw how torches illuminated the golden wings and understood that they slept under the protection of the gods and Roman destiny. The loss of the eagle meant not simply military failure, but that the gods had turned away. These beliefs had direct consequences. Livy wrote that after the defeat at Lake Trasimene, when the Carthaginians crushed the Romans, it was precisely the preservation of part of the standards that saved the army from complete demoralization. The eagle gave a sense of order, even in the chaos of defeat. But what happened when Romans lost this symbol? The sources emphasize a legion could be disbanded, its name consigned to oblivion, and the surviving warriors forever marked with shame. Romans knew the price not only of victories, but also of defeats. If a soldier abandoned his weapons, he could be forgiven, but the loss of the eagle was a crime against Rome itself. This manifested the difference between personal weakness and collective catastrophe. To a modern person, this can be compared to an airplane crash due to crew error. Everyone dies, and the blame falls not only on the pilot, but on the entire airline.
Such understanding turned every expedition, every movement of the column into a ritual. The aquilifer carrying the eagle walked ahead and was surrounded by special guard. His figure, under the flame of the sun, stood out among hundreds of helmets, and it seemed as if the entire army moved, following the radiance of his banner. Those who walked beside felt that they were guarding not simply a piece of metal, but the honor of thousands of people and the very fate of Rome. But precisely then, when everything seemed solid, when discipline had been turned into religion, Rome encountered a trial that broke the most steadfast legions. In the north, beyond the gloomy forests, under rains and fogs, hid an enemy who was destined to tear the eagles from Roman hands and make the empire shudder with horror. At the beginning of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire seemed unshakable. The fields of Italy fed the legions, roads connected the provinces, and the eagles of legions gleamed in distant campaigns. But precisely then, in the 9th year of our era, struck the catastrophe that became a nightmare for the entire Roman people. In the dark and damp forests of Germany, 3 legions, the 17th, 18th and 19th, found themselves trapped by barbarians under the leadership of Arminius. Tacitus and Dio Cassius wrote that it was precisely in the Teutoburg forest that Rome lost not only tens of thousands of warriors, but also its sacred eagles. The march began as an ordinary movement of a column through hostile lands. Romans walked in heavy armor, their column stretched for many kilometers, and rains washed out the roads and made wagons useless. Warriors sank in mud up to their ankles, shields slid heavily across shoulders, breath was lost under the weight of armor. The forest around was dense, branches creaked under gusts of wind, and even experienced centurions understood. The formation was losing clarity, and discipline was dissolving in the chaos of swamps and thickets. Among the soldiers sounded trumpets, tubae. Their sound served as a signal for regrouping. This special instrument replaced the commander's shout and gave the army rhythm, but in the rumble of thunder and rustle of trees, sounds were lost. The eagle went ahead, and each time it appeared between the trees, the hearts of legionaries stopped. It was the only point of order in the surrounding chaos. Arminius, a former ally of Rome and trained in Roman tactics, lured the troops into a trap. His Germans struck the column from the forest like a hammer on red-hot iron. Trees broke, spears whistled, and the entire column, stretched for dozens of stadia, plunged into confusion. Legate Publius Quinctilius Varus understood. Loss of formation meant death. But worse than death could be the loss of eagles. Livy mentioned that in such cases, commanders ordered to hide the standards or even bury them in the earth, just so the enemy would not seize them. The Germans knew the significance of the eagles and threw themselves at the aquiliferes with special fury. One of the aquiliferes, as sources write, buried the eagle in the swamp so that no one could find it. Another died covering the standard with his body, and only decades later did archaeologists find fragments of these banners in Germanic soil. For Romans, each such case was not simply the loss of metal, it was a break in the sacred connection between soldier and empire. Imagination paints the picture. Rain pours from the heavens, mud sticks to sandals, the eagle in the aquilifer's hands grows heavy like lead, and suddenly the darkness of barbarians closes around. The soldier understands that he stands between shame and death. To fall together with the eagle meant to fulfill the oath. To lose it meant to bring eternal curse upon himself and his comrades. Varus was forced to make a decision that became fatal. Instead of retreating to fortifications, he continued movement, hoping to break through. But the column broke into pieces, and each piece found itself defenseless. Eagles fell one after another into the mud and disappeared into enemy hands. This was as if the heart of the army had been torn from its chest. News of the defeat reached Rome, and historians wrote that Emperor Augustus, upon hearing of the 3 lost legions, in despair struck his head against the walls and screamed, "Varus, give me back my legions." But together with the legions he had lost, the eagles, a symbol that could not be replaced. From then on, the question was not only about revenge, but about returning the sacred banners without which the empire felt beheaded. After the horror of the Teutoburg forest, Rome shuddered.
3 legions had vanished, tens of thousands of warriors lay dead in the swamps, and their eagles, symbols of immortal might, were in enemy hands. Tacitus wrote that for Romans this defeat was not simply military collapse, but the crash of the very idea of invincibility. Emperor Augustus, shaken to his depths, ordered that no one should ever again call the numbers of the destroyed legions. The 17th, 18th, and 19th were erased from history as if they had never existed. For a Roman, this was more terrible than death. To erase memory meant to destroy not only people, but their very honor. Punishment for losing the eagle was inevitable. Ancient sources say that warriors who survived catastrophes of such scale were subjected to the procedure of decimation. This was one of the most cruel forms of military punishment. Every 10th soldier in the unit was killed by his own comrades. The term itself came from the Latin word for 10th part, but far more terrible was that the rest had to live with this shame. They were deprived of rewards, rights to land, their religion ceased to exist. For a person raised in a culture of honor, this was equivalent to eternal exile. Romans knew the power of fear and shame. For a legionary, disgrace meant the impossibility of looking his children in the eyes, the impossibility of returning to his village as a hero. If death on the battlefield was the crown of courage, then loss of the eagle turned a man into a living symbol of defeat. A modern person can imagine this as the fall of a sports team that not only lost, but was forever deprived of the right to participate in competitions. The eagle that ended up with the enemy became a shrine for the barbarians. Germans displayed trophies in sanctuaries, proud that the gods of Rome themselves were now prisoners of their forests. For the empire, this was unbearable. Each such eagle reminded that even the might of legions could collapse if their symbol ended up in foreign hands, and that is precisely why Romans organized expeditions for decades to return the stolen banners. In these searches for eagles manifested all the greatness and stubbornness of Rome. Livy noted that the eagle was more important than gold and land. For its sake, they sent thousands of warriors, burned villages, laid roads into unexplored lands. Warriors participating in such campaigns knew that they were going not simply to take revenge, but to wash away the shame written in history. And every step through the mud of Germanic swamps was a step toward returning the soul of the legion to its body. One must understand that the eagle was not only a military emblem, but also a religious object. Before battle, the legate made sacrifices before it, and this was precisely what was considered an appeal to the gods for victory. The loss of the eagle meant that sacrifices were rejected, that divine support had abandoned the army. For soldiers, this was akin to how an eternal flame would be extinguished before the army's eyes. When archaeologists centuries later found fragments of standards in the swamps, they confirmed Roman accounts were not exaggerations. Metal covered with rust lay among bones and weapons, like a witness that eagles indeed fell together with their legions. Each such find was like revived memory of the shame that Rome tried to erase. But the story did not end in the swamps of Germany. The blow dealt to Roman pride gave birth to the desire to take revenge and return what was lost. And precisely then entered the scene a man who was destined to return the eagles and turn their return into a symbol of the empire's honor reborn. After the death of 3 legions in the forests of Germany, many years passed, but the memory of the lost eagles gave no peace either to Roman emperors or to common citizens. Tacitus wrote that Varus's defeat became a wound that did not heal for decades. For Romans, eagles that ended up with the enemy were like hostages who had to be returned at any cost. The death of thousands of soldiers could be justified, but the loss of sacred banners, never. Iron will for retribution was embodied in the campaigns of Germanicus, nephew of Emperor Tiberius. In the 15th and 16th years of our era, he led expeditions deep into Germanic forests, striving to return the eagles of the fallen legions. His armies had to break through swamps, hastily build bridges from fallen trees, fight in fog and under rain, where every enemy spear flew as if from the thicket itself. One of the most important terms connected to these campaigns was signum. This is what the signs of units smaller than a legion were called, cohorts or centuries. The loss of such signs was already considered serious disgrace, but the loss of the eagle, Aquila, was incomparably more terrible. This is precisely why Germanicus did everything not simply to win, but to search for trophies hidden by barbarians in sanctuaries. Sources report that one eagle was found in the lands of the Bructeri, another was returned during battles with the Marsi. The last eagle, according to various data, was obtained under Emperor Claudius after long decades following the defeat itself. Each time an eagle returned to Rome, this was not simply a triumph, but a sacred ritual of purification. People poured into the streets, and it seemed that the city was meeting not a piece of metal, but the spirit of fallen legions, returned to their own. To understand the power of this symbol, it suffices to recall the words of Suetonius. The eagle was considered the embodiment of Rome's genius. When it was again brought to the capital, the crowd saw not so much a golden statue as proof that even after the most terrible defeats, the empire was capable of rising. This was like the final chord after a long and painful symphony of pain, loss, anger, revenge, and finally return. Imagination paints the scene. A solemn procession through the streets, trumpets thunder, senators in white togas walk ahead, and on a high staff the golden eagle gleams once more. The crowd shouts, throws flowers, and veterans weep, seeing how the symbol of their fallen comrades rises again over Rome. For them this was not simply an event, it was the lifting of a curse, purification from the shame that had hung over their names for long years. But even the return of the eagles could not extinguish the fear that had forever settled in the Roman consciousness. The Teutoburg forest showed, legions could be destroyed, eagles could be captured, and the empire itself could prove vulnerable. Henceforth, every military campaign was accompanied by even stricter measures for guarding the banners. Aquilifers were surrounded by specially assigned warriors. They were taught to die, but not to let the staff slip from their hands. Historians note, it was precisely after these events that the rule was finally established in Roman military culture that the loss of an eagle equaled the death of a legion. The legion itself could be recreated, new people recruited, but the eagle was always only one. Its disappearance meant that the memory of the unit was doomed to eternal shame. And here arises the main question: what happened to those soldiers who survived the catastrophe and returned without the eagle? Their fate was no less terrible than the death of their comrades in the forest. Soldiers who survived the loss of the eagle returned to Rome not as heroes, but as the living dead. They bore upon themselves not only wounds, but the seal of disgrace. Sources mention that such people were often excluded from legion lists, their awards were annulled, and the name of the unit was erased from history. This was equivalent to having one's entire life erased. Livy wrote that a legion without an eagle lost the right to exist. It ceased to be a military community and turned into a crowd of fugitives. One of the most terrible punishments for soldiers was considered service without honor. They could be left in garrisons on distant borders without hope of returning to Rome. They were not entitled to rewards, land plots, or the right to participate in triumphs. This meant that after 20 years of the most arduous service, a legionary did not receive what he had risked his life for. In Roman society, where memory of ancestors and valor of the clan had colossal significance, this was like erasing a person from his own family. A special symbol of shame was the Aquilifer who lost the eagle. Even if he survived, his name became a curse. Contemporaries compared him to a ship's captain who abandoned his vessel. Death on the spot was considered more honorable. This is precisely why many Aquilifers preferred to perish together with the banner. Tacitus mentioned cases when soldiers, seeing a threat to the eagle, hid it in swamps or broke the staff so the enemy would not receive the symbol intact. But even such actions rarely saved from the brand of shame, since the very fact of loss was indelible. Sometimes legions that survived the loss of an eagle were subjected to decimation or disbandment. This was not only punishment but also a signal to all others. Rome does not forgive those who allowed the enemy to touch the sacred symbol. Modern historians note that this formed a special psychology. Legionaries preferred to perish to the last man rather than return without the eagle. Archaeological finds confirm how deeply rooted this idea became. At battle sites they found bones of warriors lying close to fragments of banners. These people obviously consciously remained to die next to the eagle, understanding that otherwise a life full of contempt and mockery awaited them. In their death was tragedy, but also a kind of salvation. One who died with the eagle preserved honor, and yet the fate of lost eagles showed that the empire could resurrect even the heaviest defeats. Each time an eagle returned to Rome, this became a lesson. Honor can be lost, but it can also be returned if one fights for it. But what never returned were the fates of those who survived defeat. Their life was an eternal reminder that shame is worse than death. And now the main question is addressed to you. If you found yourself among these legionaries, what would be more terrible? To die in the forest mud, pressing the heavy golden eagle to your chest, or to return alive but forever deprived of name, honor and memory? The Teutoburg forest showed that Romans believed sometimes death is liberation and life without honor is punishment worse than any sentence. And when today we look at armies, at flags and symbols, it is worth remembering. Precisely then, 2000 years ago, warriors proved that sometimes a tiny piece of metal weighs more than thousands of lives. And the question remains open. Are we in the modern world ready to defend our symbols the same way legionaries defended their eagle?